Welcome to Storytime with Arioso ASMR. I am so glad you could join me. Today, we will continue reading from the diary of Captain Frederick Marryat, published in 1839 and written in 1837. Today's snippet explores Captain Marryat's landing in New York. A visit to make it agreeable to both parties should be well timed. My appearance at New York was very much like bursting into a friend's house with a merry face when there is a death in it. With the sudden change from levity to condolence, any other time most happy to see you, you find us in a very unfortunate situation. Indeed, I'm very, very sorry. 260 houses have already failed, and no one knows where it is to end. Suspicion, fear, and misfortune have taken possession of this city. Had I not been aware of the cause, I should have imagined that the plague was raging, and I had the description of Defoe before me. Not a smile on the countenance among the crowd who pass and repass, hurried steps, careworn faces, rapid exchanges of salutation, or hasty communication of anticipated ruin before the sun goes down. Here 2 or 3 are gathered on one side, whispering and watching that they are not overheard. There is solitary, with his arms folded and his hat slouched, brooding over departed affluence. Mechanics thrown out of employment are pacing up and down with the air of famished wolves. The violent shock has been communicated, like that of electricity through all public works, have been discontinued, and the Irish immigrant leans against his shanty with his spade idle in his hand and starves as his thoughts wander back to his own Emerald Isle. The Americans delight in the hyperbole. In fact, they hardly have a metaphor without it. During this crash, when every day 15 or 20 merchants' names appeared in the newspaper as bankrupts, one party, not in a very good humor, was hastening down Broadway when he was run against by another whose temper was equally unamiable. This collision roused the choler of both. "What the devil do you mean, sir?" cried one. "I've got a great mind to knock you in the middle of next week." This occurring on a Saturday, the wrath of the other was checked by the recollection of how very favorable such a blow would be to his present circumstances. "Will you? By heavens, then pray do. It's just the thing I want, for how else am I going to get over next Monday, and the acceptances I must take up is more than I can tell." All the banks have stopped payment in specie, and there's not $1 to be had. I walked down Wall Street and had a convincing proof of the great demand for money, for somebody picked my pocket. The militia are under arms, as riots are expected. The banks in the country and other towns have followed the example of New York, and thus has General Jackson's currency bill been repealed without the aid of Congress. Affairs are now at their worst, and now that such is the case, the New Yorkers appeared to recover their spirits. One of the newspapers humorously observes, "All Broadway is like unto a new-made widow, and don't know whether to laugh or cry." There certainly is a very remarkable energy in the American disposition. If they fall, they bound up again. Somebody has observed that New York merchants are of the clastic nature, that when fit for nothing else, they might be converted into coach springs, and such really appears to be their character. Nobody refuses to take the paper of the New York banks, although they virtually have stopped payment. They never refuse anything in New York. But no one will give specie in change. A great distress is occasioned by this want of circulating medium. Some of the shopkeepers told me that they had been obliged to turn away $100 a day, and many a Southerner who has come up with a large supply of Southern notes has found himself a pauper, and has been indebted to a friend for a few dollars in specie to get home again. The radicals here, for there are radicals, it appears, in a democracy, and the lowest depth a lower deep, are very loud in their complaints. I was watching the swarming multitude in Wall Street this morning, when one of these fellows was declaiming against the banks for stopping specie payments, and robbing a poor man in such a villainous manner, when one of the merchants who appeared to know his customer said to him, "Well, as you say, it is hard for a poor fellow like you not to be able to get dollars for his notes. Hand them out, and I'll give you specie for them myself." The guard had not a cent in his pocket, and walked away looking very foolish. He reminded me of a little chimney sweeper at the Tower Hamlets election, asking "Wat was" my opinions about prig matter, a very important point to him certainly, he having no parents, and having been brought up by the parish. I was in a store when a thoroughbred Democrat walked in. He talked loud and voluntarily gave it as his opinion that all this distress was the very best thing that could have happened to the country, as America would now keep all the specie and pay her English creditors with bankruptcies. There always appears to me to be a great want of moral principle in all radicals. Indeed, the leveling principles of radicalism are adverse to the sacred rights. At Philadelphia, the ultra-democrats have held a large public meeting, at which one of the first resolutions brought forward and agreed to was that they did not owe 1 farthing to the English people. "They may say the times are bad," said a young American to me, "but I think that they are excellent. A $20 note used to last me but a week, but now it is as good as Fortunatus's purse, which was never empty." I eat my dinner at the hotel and show them my $20 note. The landlord turns away from it as if it were the head of Medusa, and begs that I will pay another time. I buy everything that I want, and I have only to offer my $20 note in payment, and my credit is unbounded, that is, for any sum under $20. If they ever do give change again in New York, it will make very unfortunate change in my affairs. A government circular enforcing the Act of Congress, which obliges all those who have to pay custom house duties or postage to do so in specie, has created great dissatisfaction and added much to the distress and difficulty, at the same time that they, the government, refuse to take from their debtors the notes of the banks upon the ground that they are no longer legal tenders. They compel their creditors to take those notes, having a large quantity in their possession at the time that the banks suspend specie payments, an act of despotism which the English government would not venture upon. Miss Martineau's work is before me. How dangerous it is to prophesy. Speaking of the merchants of New York and their recovering after the heavy losses they sustained by the calamitous fire of 1835, she says that although 18 millions of property were destroyed, not one merchant failed. And she continues, it seems now as if the commercial credit of New York stand any shock short of an earthquake like that of Lishan. That was the prophecy of 1836. Where is the commercial credit of New York now in 1837? The distress for change has produced a curious remedy. Every man is now his own banker. Go to the theaters, a place of public amusement, and instead of change, you receive an IOU. At the hotels and oyster cellars, it is the same thing. Call for a glass of brandy and water, and the change is 15 tickets, each good for 1 glass of brandy and water. At an oyster shop, eat a plate of oysters, and you have in return 7 tickets, good for 1 plate of oysters each. It is the same everywhere. The barbers give you tickets, good for so many shaves, and where there are beggars in the streets, I presume they would give you tickets and change, good for so much philanthropy. Dealers in general give out their own banknotes, or as they are called here, Shinplasters, which are good for $1, and from that down to 2.5 cents, all of which are redeemable, and redeemable only upon a general return to cash payments. Hence arises another variety of exchange in Wall Street. Tom, do you want any oysters for lunch today? Yes. Then here's a ticket, and give me 2 shaves in return. The most prominent causes of this convulsion have already been laid before the English public, but there is one, that of speculating in land, which has not been sufficiently dwelt upon, nor has the importance been given to it which it deserves, as perhaps, next to those losses occasioned by the Great Fire, it led more than any other species of over-speculation and over-trading to the distress which has ensued. Not but that the event must have taken place in the natural course of things. Cash payments produce sure but small returns, but no commerce can be carried on by this on any extended scale. Credit, as long as it is good, is so much extra capital, in itself nominal and non-existent, but producing real returns. If anyone will look back upon the commercial history of the last 50 years, he will perceive that the system of credit is always attended with a periodical blow-up. In England, perhaps, once in 20 years. In America, once in from 7 to 10. This arises from there being no safety valve, no check which can be put to it by mutual consent of all parties. One house extends its credit, and for a time it profits. Another follows this example. The facility of credit induces those who obtain it to embark in other speculations, foreign to their business, for credit thus becomes extra capital, which they do not know how to employ. Such has been the case in the present instance, but this is no reason for the credit system not being continued. These occasional explosions act as warnings, and, for the time, people are more cautious. They stop for a while to repair damages and recover. And when they go ahead again, it's not quite so fast. The loss is severely felt because people are not prepared to meet it. But if all the profits of the years of healthy credit were added up, and the balance sheet struck, between that and the loss at the explosion, the advantage gained by the credit system would still be found to be great. The advancement of America depends wholly upon it. It is by credit alone that she has made such rapid strides, and it is by credit alone that she can continue to flourish. At the same time, she enriches those who trade with her. In this latter crisis, there was more blame to be attached to the English, who forced their credit upon the Americans, than to the Americans, who, having such unlimited credit, thought that they might advantageously speculate with the capital of others. One of the most singular affections of the human mind is a proneness to excessive speculation, and it may be here noticed that the disease, for such it may be termed, is peculiarly English and American. Men in their race for gain appear like horses that have run away, to have been blinded by the rapidity of their own motion. It almost amounts to an epidemic, and is infectious, the wise and the foolish being equally liable. We had ample evidence of this in the bubble manias which took place in England in the years 1825 and 1826. A mania of this kind had infected the people of America for 2 or 3 years previous to the crash. It was that of speculating in land, and to show the extent to which it had been carried on, we may take the following examples. The city of New York, which is built upon a narrow island about 10 miles in length, at present covers about 3 miles of that distance, and has a population of 300,000 inhabitants. And by calculation, these lots, when built upon, would contain an additional population of 1,350,000. They were first purchased at from $100 to $150 each, but as the epidemic raged, they rose to upwards of $2,000. At Brooklyn, on Long Island, opposite to New York, and about half a mile distant from it, lots were marked out to the extent of 14 miles, which could contain an extra population of 1 million, and these were eagerly speculated in. At Staten Island, at the entrance of the Sound, an estate was purchased by some speculators for $10,000, was divided into lots and planned as a town to be called New Brighton. And had the whole of the lots been sold at the price which many were previous to the crash, the original speculators would have realized $3 million. But the infatuations were not confined to the precincts of New York. Everywhere it existed. Government lands, which could only be paid for in specie, were eagerly sought after. Plans of new towns were puffed up. Drawings were made in which every street was laid down and named. Churches, theaters, hospitals, railroad communications, canals, steamboats, and the office all appeared on paper as if in actual existence, when, in fact, the very site was yet a forest, with not a long hut within a mile of the pretended city. Lots in these visionary cities were eagerly purchased, increased daily in value, and afforded a fine harvest to those who took advantage of the credulity of others. One man would buy a lot with extensive water privileges, and upon going to examine it, would find those privileges rather too extensive, the whole lot being under water. Even after the crisis, there was a man still going about who made a decent livelihood by setting up his plan of a city, the lots of which he sold by public auction on condition of $1 being paid down to secure the purchase if approved of. The mania had not yet subsided, and many paid down their dollar upon their purchase of a lot. This was all he required. He went to the next town and sold the same lots over and over again. To check this madness of speculation was one reason why an act of Congress was passed, obliging all purchasers of government lands to pay in specie. Nevertheless, government received 9 or 10 millions in specie after the bill passed. Now, when it is considered what a large portion of the capital drawn from England was applied to these wild speculations, sums which, when they were required, could not be realized, as when crises occurred, property thus purchased immediately fell to about 1/10 of what was paid for it. It will be clearly seen that, from this unfortunate mania, a great portion of the present distress must have arisen. The attempt of General Jackson and his successors to introduce a specie currency into a country which exists upon credit was an act of folly, and has ended in complete failure. A few weeks after he had issued from the mint a large coinage of gold, there was hardly an eagle to be seen, and the metal might almost as well have remained in the mine from whence it had been extracted. It was still in the country, but had all been absorbed by the agriculturists, and such will ever be the case in a widely extended agricultural country. The farmers, principally Dutch, live upon a portion of their produce and sell the rest. Formerly, they were content with bank bills or Mexican dollars, which they laid by for a rainy day, and they remained locked up for years before they were required. When the gold was issued, it was eagerly collected by these people as more convenient, and laid by the farmers' wives, in the foot of an old worsted stocking, where the major part of it will remain. And thus has the famous gold currency bill been upset by the hoarding propensities of a parcel of old women. I hope you enjoyed today's installment of Captain Frederick Marryat's diary. I'll see you next week for a new installment. Take care, beautiful.